They didn't just rob banks. They turned every crime scene into a potential war zone, and then mocked the FBI in the morning paper. And in another city, another decade, a different robber had a rule even more terrifying: never surrender. Ever. 2 different cases. 2 different crews. One thing in common: they were willing to kill themselves and everyone around them rather than quietly go to prison. This is Obscured Crimes, and today we're digging into 2 little-known but chilling cases featured on the FBI files: Hidden Agenda and Death Pact. Stay with this video, because by the end you'll see exactly how the FBI hunts criminals who are prepared to die rather than be caught. Let's get into it. You're watching Obscured Crimes, where we dig into the real investigations that never quite made the front page, but absolutely should have. If you like FBI cases, obscure manhunts, and the psychology behind violent offenders, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next deep dive. Now, let's start with the bombers who wanted attention almost as badly as they wanted money. You're a local patrol officer responding to a bank robbery alarm. The doors are smashed, the tellers are terrified, and the suspects are long gone. That's bad enough, but then someone spots it, near the vault. Under a counter, in a trash can, a device, wires, a timer. This wasn't just a robbery. It was a message. In the Hidden Agenda case, a gang of bank robbers decided stealing cash wasn't enough. They wanted control over the police, over the FBI, and over the narrative. So they started leaving behind sophisticated explosive devices as parting gifts. These weren't crude hoaxes designed to scare. They were built well enough that bomb technicians had to assume every single one could kill. For investigators, that changed everything. A bank robbery scene is normally chaotic but familiar. Witness statements, security footage, fingerprints, fibers, cars leaving the lot, add a live bomb into that mix. And the priorities flip immediately. Clear civilians contain the area, make the device safe. Only then can the evidence collection even start. The bomb squad was suddenly the front line of a financial crime. As the robberies continued, something else started happening. Local newspapers began receiving letters. They weren't confessions. They were taunts. The author bragged about outsmarting authorities. They hinted at motives, hinted at more violence, and dared law enforcement to catch them. For the FBI, this was both a curse and a gift. On one hand, it meant the offenders were watching media coverage, feeding on fear and attention. On the other hand, letters meant handwriting to analyze possible DNA traces on envelopes and stamps, linguistic patterns that profilers could study. The Bureau brought in behavioral analysts to look at everything: the vocabulary, the sentence structure, the way the writer talked about themselves and the crimes. Were they one person or multiple? Did they sound educated? Local, military, technical? Every word was a potential clue. While the profilers worked the letters, other teams focused on the physical crime scenes. Even with bombs in the mix, the robbers still had to approach the bank, enter and exit, move through predictable paths, flee using some kind of vehicle agents pulled, surveillance footage from highways and nearby businesses, transaction records for unusual activity around the banks, phone records for calls made before and after. Each robbery explosives experts studied the devices themselves. Type of explosives, wiring style, timing mechanisms, any unique components or assembly quirks. Bombs are like fingerprints. Experienced bomb techs can often link multiple devices to the same maker just from small details. The question became, were these robbers experienced with explosives? Or had someone else, maybe a single bomb maker, joined the crew? With every new robbery, the risk went up. One mistake by the offenders, one mistake by a responding officer, one unlucky bank teller, and a device would go from evidence to mass casualty. For law enforcement leadership, that meant time was no longer on their side. Pressure mounted, internally, to stop the spree. Publicly, as media coverage grew; politically, as fear spread through the community. The more the offenders taunted authorities in writing, the more personal this got for the investigators. This wasn't just about stolen cash anymore. This was about ego, control, and the thrill of risk. And in criminology, those are exactly the traits that cause offenders to slip up. Eventually, the combination of forensic work and behavioral analysis began to pay off. Patterns emerged. The timing of the robberies, the types of banks chosen, the geographic clustering of the hits, the consistent bomb design that allowed the FBI to narrow down likely home base areas, build a profile of the offender, predict the most likely kind of next target. Agents increased covert surveillance at likely locations, Marked units stayed visible to reassure the public. Plainclothes teams stayed invisible to catch the crew in the act. When the case finally broke, it wasn't because the bomb makers were geniuses. It was because no one can stay perfect forever. Letters that were meant to taunt instead betrayed personality and background. Devices that were meant to terrify instead tied the crimes together with clear technical signatures. And moving around a city again and again always leaves a trail. The hidden agenda didn't stay hidden. The FBI's message by the end was clear. You can escalate, you can brag, you can build bombs. But the more complicated you make your crime, the more evidence you leave for someone patient enough to follow it. If the hidden agenda crew used bombs and ego to raise the stakes, our next case did something even darker. They made a promise. Not to each other exactly, but to themselves. Never be taken alive. Now we move to the 1990s and to Chicago. Different city, different decade, same kind of fear. Banks across the area started getting hit by a robber who wasn't interested in theatrics like bombs. He was interested in control through raw violence. He came in fast. He showed he was willing to hurt people. Every robbery was more aggressive than the last. Tellers and customers could see it in his body language. He wasn't bluffing. That alone made him more dangerous than most bank robbers. But that wasn't the worst part. As the robberies stacked up, investigators noticed a clear pattern. Increased use of force, more aggressive threats, higher risk of someone getting shot. This is a familiar arc in criminal behavior. The first crime is tense, cautious, full of adrenaline. When they get away with it, the next one feels easier. Over time, fear drops, confidence grows, and so does the body count. Chicago police brought in the FBI when it became obvious this wasn't a one-off crime, but the work of a serial bank robber. The Joint Task Force pooled their strengths, local knowledge and street intel from Chicago PD, federal resources, labs and databases from the FBI. They needed to catch this guy before the phrase, "no one was hurt," turned into multiple fatalities. Investigators dug into security footage from each robbery, witness accounts of his voice, mannerisms, and possible accents, ballistic evidence from any shots fired inside the banks, patterns in timing, routes, and getaway methods. With each robbery, the picture sharpened. They noticed certain consistencies. The way he held his weapon, the way he controlled the room, the speed of entry and exit. The general region he seemed comfortable operating in it. Gave them enough to start building a suspect list and to map out the likely neighborhood or communities he moved through. But this wasn't just a guy willing to use violence. At some point in the investigation, law enforcement learned something chilling. He had made a pact. When agents finally identified their primary suspect, they discovered he wasn't alone. There was another man in the background, a partner. Someone who shared the same mindset and the same promise: never surrender. Whether they said it out loud, wrote it down, or just carried it as an unspoken agreement, the effect was the same. If the police cornered them, they would fight to the death rather than put their hands up. For tactical planners, that changed everything. A standard arrest assumes on some level that the suspect might drop the weapon run or freeze long enough to be taken into custody. A suspect with a death pact is different. You have to assume he's armed, he's ready, and he's mentally fully committed to a last stand that makes every knock on a door, every traffic stop, every surveillance tail a potential gunfight. Once the task force had their suspects, the work shifted from who did it to how do we safely take them down. They increased physical surveillance on locations linked to the men, monitoring of associates and known contacts, coordination with SWAT and tactical teams who might be used in the arrest. This stage of an investigation is often the most tense. You know who you're hunting. You have enough for arrest warrants. But if you move too soon, or in the wrong way, someone innocent can die. Agents studied every routine: where they slept, where they ate, what routes they drove. When they were most isolated and least likely to be surrounded by civilians, the goal was simple but incredibly difficult: create a moment where the suspects had no good options, only the reality that they were outnumbered, outgunned, and out of time. Eventually, that moment came. Details differ depending on the exact case dramatized in the FBI files, but the principles are always the same. Contain the area, limit escape route. Try one last time for a peaceful surrender. Be fully prepared for the opposite. When officers and agents finally moved in on the man behind the Chicago robbery spree, they did so knowing he had spent years proving one thing: he would not go quietly. What followed was a confrontation shaped as much by psychology as by weapons. Sometimes, even the most hardened, never-surrender suspect can crack when reality closes in. Dozens of guns pointed at them, no way out, the realization that death is very real, very immediate, and very final. Sometimes they keep their pact. Either way, these are the kinds of confrontations the FBI and local SWAT teams train for relentlessly because there is no margin for error. In Death Pact, the investigation revealed not just robbery and violence, but a mindset. For some criminals, freedom at any cost includes their own lives. And those are the cases where hesitation can kill, on both sides. So what do these two cases, bomb-planting bank robbers and a never-surrender death pact, really show us? First, they reveal something ugly about escalation. Whether it's leaving live bombs behind in banks or promising never to surrender alive, each step is about control. Control of the crime scene, control of the narrative, control of their own fate, even if it ends in death. Second, they show why agencies like the FBI obsess over patterns. The wiring in a bomb, the wording in a letter. The way a robber moves through a lobby, the increasing violence from one crime to the next. All of it paints a picture, not just of what happened, but who is likely behind it and what they'll do next. Finally, they remind us of something most people never think about. For every famous headline case, there are dozens of others, complex, terrifying, and nearly forgotten, where investigators had to play chess against people who didn't care if the board caught fire. Those are the stories we tell here. This has been Obscured Crimes. If you want more deep dives into real investigations from the FBI files, forensic files, and other overlooked true crime cases, make sure you subscribe, like this video, and comment below. Which should we cover next? Another obscure FBI manhunt? Or a case where forensic science solved what everyone thought was unsolvable? Thanks for watching. Stay safe and stay curious.